Okay, guys, so finally at last, the primary is done. We have our results in. And if you're in politics or even if you're not, you're going to be forced to reckon with the midterms, whether it's, digging into running people's campaigns or actually having to suffer through getting endless streams of mailers and commercials about the race coming up. So, um, we're conservatives here. This is what we do. But when you're looking at winning races, it's very crucial to look into what your loyal opposition is doing, what they're up to, what they think, what makes them tick, which is why I think this is freaking fantastic. There's a new Manhattan Institute poll that suggests something that's kind of not what I would have thought. And it suggests that the Democrat Party is ready for some normalcy, if you will, and is a bit less progressive or way less progressive than we think they are because of the loudest activists on that side. Now, the survey finds that a large block of Democrats are actually what we would think of as moderates, and more voters want the party to be normal. So, and normal is a varying term. So, discuss really what that means here for us in North Carolina. Because that's really right. That's where it's at. That's the bulk of our concern is North Carolina, even though we're hearing about the national, how it's playing out is I'm bringing on my good friend, Jesse Arm, who is the VP of External Affairs for the Manhattan Institute. Hello.
Hey, Sloan. Thanks for having me. Good to chat with you.
I love your polls so much because your sampling is right on. A lot of polls, NBC, CNN, some of those, especially measuring attitudes and beliefs, they just missed the mark.
Yeah. Well, in both of our most recent polls, this one where we talked to the Democratic coalition of today, as well as our last one where we talked about and polled the Republican coalition of today, we did something a little bit different than what a lot of the mainstream pollsters will do, which is that we wanted a holistic look at the coalition, right? So we asked both with the Republican poll, independents who voted for Trump or just Trump voters, as well as people who call themselves registered Republicans. And it's a similar overlap, but it's not a perfect overlap. And ditto with this poll that we just ran tonight, or that we're going to talk about tonight, we polled people who are registered Democrats as well as Kamala Harris 2024 voters. So that's going to include some Dems that voted for Trump. It might include some Republicans that voted for Kamala. And that is why I kind of lean into using the phrase a lot of this is a poll about the Democratic coalition in its kind of widest understanding. So there are people who we surveyed who are so left-wing, they hated Kamala Harris so much that they didn't even vote for her, who ended up in this sample. And there are also people who have been Republicans their whole lives who just can't, for one reason or another, maybe stomach the president and now voted for Harris and fell into the sample that way. And so we got a pretty broad understanding of the Democratic coalition in kind of its widest possible conception.
So you're including in that, in other words, protest votes from the right and this pro-Pally constituency that, thinks that even Kamala Harris liked Israel and Jews too much for their liking. And that's actually pretty accurate, because in North Carolina, we have the state party here that's the only state party of, Democrat and Republican that has ever voted, and has done so 3 years in a row, to boycott the state of Israel, to withhold all military funding, and had a deep anti-Semitism problem right here, not in Michigan, not in California or New York, right here.
Yeah, it's not that surprising to me, given that there is just such a, one thing that was really interesting in this poll is that when we did the Republican one, we picked up a lot of Republicans who believe crazy ideas, total conspiracy theories, really out there things. 9/11 was an inside job. October 7th was manufactured by the Israeli government. Holocaust denial, revisionism, you name it. There's an appetite for it. But I do think there's a strong conspiratorial streak to the American right. And really, since Trump came on the scene, he attracted a lot of these people who are different, who didn't fit into the Democratic coalition for all sorts of reasons, and he brought them into the right. But they do have sort of out there beliefs, and they're sort of positively disposed to say, if the authorities tell me to believe it, maybe I shouldn't. That can sometimes have healthy manifestations, like it did during COVID, I think, and unhealthy ones too. like we're starting to see today with some facets of the dissident right. But with Democrats, it's a little bit different. There actually is a sort of knee-jerk, I'm going to yield to the authorities. Like what the authorities are telling me is probably right. So when we ask about things in the context of, is this, some people call this a conspiracy theory, do you buy it? The numbers are a lot lower. But it takes a lot for Democrats who conceive of themselves as anti-racist, as the farthest thing from bigots toward any specific groups, to identify a group that they can be openly bigoted toward. They have that in whites. They're willing to traffic openly in anti-white bigotry. They have that in men. They're willing to openly advocate against men and argue that women should have an upper hand in society today. And they're not willing to say, for the most part, in any kind of plurality or majority sense, that they're anti-Semitic, maybe even if they are. But they will say that they're virulently anti-Israel and that they will embrace hardcore bigotries toward people who come from Israel. And you know, just literally in the last hour here, I saw Ro Khanna, who's the Democratic congressman from California.
Yeah.
In his district, there were a couple of Israelis out to dinner who were having a meal and speaking Hebrew with each other, and they got physically beaten up by somebody who was anti-Semitic and targeting them because they were speaking Hebrew. And Ro Khanna, you know, gets on Twitter and condemns it, but it's like, it's sort of like watching an arsonist condemn a fire.
Right.
Because I mean, what's Ro Khanna going to say? That, like, this is the definition of, oh, it's just about Israel. It's not because they're Jewish. They're Israeli speaking Hebrew. But it's like an instance like this exposes just how inch deep and stupid that kind of logic is.
Well, I will say that I agree with this from personal experience and from being in this business for over 12 years now, where I've covered anti-Semitic movements on campus and really anti-Israel stuff. I've only been targeted, and I mean violently targeted, like people locked up for it by the right wing anti-Semites. I think there's a difference, by the way, because they don't believe Jews belong in the Republican Party, period, point blank, right? So I think there's a difference that I've seen between covering movements in the left wing anti-Zionism, and it is the bulk of it. If you're a Jew, right? If you're a left wing Jew, you can be in our coalition. You just can't be a Zionist. Okay. The difference between that and the right wing wants you dead, period, point blank, in a discussion. They will allow you to leave the country or you can die. And I mean that. And I've seen that. And I believe, I mean, look, both forms are very virulent. Absolutely. They all lead to the same outcomes. But the right wing anti-Semitism that we see, that does, Jesse, feel to me like a foreign op. We have never in our society, we have never as a people seen just raw Jew hatred like this, conspiratorial, we're just asking questions. We've seen it in various forms in Russia. I think we've seen it in China, during the revolution with the Four Olds program, right? Bringing in some of these conspiratorial thing. Oh, there's somebody in charge, someone, it's just, to me, I think it's organic on the left because it fits that oppressor model, that the victim and the oppressor model. And they fit that nicely with America, by the way. If they hate Israel, you can bet your ass they hate America. It just is for the same sort of reasons. So I think they have some sort of intellectual model. The danger, though, is that they have institutionalized anti-Semitism. They have institutionalized anti-white male as well, right?
Right, absolutely.
We're institutionalizing it within our party. That's the harbinger of something horrific to come for this country.
Yeah, I think just zooming in on the left a little bit, it's such an easy to read playbook, right? In some sense, they're not anti-Semitic, because if you're a Jew who disavows the Jewish tradition, the Jewish state, any kind of financial success that the Jewish community has had in America as a result of the open capitalist meritocracy that we have here, thank God, that has allowed the Jewish community to thrive through hard work and ingenuity. If you disavow all of those things, it's fine. It's permissive. It's not self-implicating. In fact, it's even more attractive in some ways than the 2020 peak anti-whiteness, because it's less self-implicating for the majority of white progressives who are not Jewish themselves. Again, you have an exit strategy if you're Jewish yourself. All you have to do is disavow Judaism, the Jewish state, and anything else that is a little too particularist.
You could, metaphorically speaking, tuck your star in and pull it out when you're not around your progressive friends, right?
But it's funny. It's like the Ashkenazi Jewish IQ is just too powerful. It ends up like, who's the most effective, like, left-wing anti-Semite? Noam Chomsky, an Ashkenazi Jew. Who's the most like effective, like, right-wing ones? You see Dave Smith is like one of these people. It's like, it's always people who claim some kind of Jewish lineage themselves too.
That's so funny. So the self-hating Jews on the left are bright, brilliant, and relatively speaking. And then you've got alcoholic dumbasses who are not Jewish. And that would be Tucker Carlson, which, and again, this is the difference, advocating for a DNA test and a blood test. So in other words, you have the, okay, you can escape it by escaping your identity, to Tucker Carlson's. This is what I'm talking about, is that there's no escape, and a DNA, that's Hitlerian, of course.
Yeah. Right-wing anti-Semitism is definitely more all over the place. It's definitely more incoherent. It's like, on the one hand, that Tucker Carlson adjacent crowd will condemn and be upset about Jews because they are cloistered and too inwardly focused and too communal, and they're too obsessed with their own bloodlines. But on the other hand, it's like, they're not even really Jews. They're not even really descended from the same bloodline. The problem with them is that they're too cosmopolitan. They're too engaged with outside institutions. It's a much more incoherent kind of rambly thing, even more so if you look to somebody like a Candace Owens, who is, totally off of her rocker without any kind of ideological coherence to her bigotry. Whereas on the left, there is more rhyme or reason to it. It is race communism, essentially. It is we don't want you to be a part of any community that isn't just the hardened progressive universalist community.
Okay, I see that. And what I see too is with this the anti-Semitism on the right, it is predictably bleeding over into other areas. You're going to have Fishback and his acolytes. Of course, he's running for governor in Florida, if you don't know. Starting with Jew hatred and then slipping now and attacking Black people. I mean, because it's just anyone. And by the way, when you drill it all down, and it's anyone that's not, it's the opposite of DEI, right? Everyone, we were afflicted, right? Is what their community message is. We were targeted because we're white males, etc., and we're going to take it out. And I'm literally seeing them, Jesse, target women, Indians, of course. Jews, of course, were frontline, and now Black people. I mean, the things that they have said about Byron Donalds. One guy said, Kai Schwimmer, okay, he's the new leader of the College Republicans of America, which, by the way, is a made-up group that has a name just sounding enough for people to believe it's Republicans. But he said that based on the, I guess, phrenology of the way that Byron Donalds looked compared to Fishback, that he looked suspicious and could not be trusted. Now we know what he's talking about. So it doesn't end with Jew hatred. They've developed this model, Jesse, that they're applying to everyone. You see what I'm saying? That's not like that.
I mean, many people in that same camp are, making the case for Gavin Newsom over even J.D. Vance on the basis of looks or physiognomy or something along those lines. No, but you raised James Fishback, and I think he is an interesting character and an interesting case because, like, people in my orbit, people in our orbit, like, we know James Fishback. James Fishback's been around. James Fishback was an ardent supporter of the state of Israel, a friend and huge fan of, I don't know if he was a friend, but he was a huge fan and ankle grabber to some extent of Barry Weiss. He was someone who was deeply involved with Vivek Ramaswamy and his efforts. His debate group was deeply integrated in that. And this is very much a creature of conservative ink in every way, shape, or form. But he's a younger guy. He's desperate to not necessarily achieve elected office, but achieve prominence or fame of some kind. And he found an avenue and he found a niche in the attention economy. I don't think necessarily everyone who he attracts is, a foaming at the mouth bigot who, for example, can't go into a restaurant and be served by a black waiter because they're so
I don't either.
and filled with hate. I think they're sort of lowbrow, bored, internet addicted, brain rotted, a lot of Gen Z men who are just looking for entertainment. Yeah, shock jock. You said that's right on the money. It's an attraction to the very nature of being subversive and offensive, and that is where I struggle, because I don't think we can necessarily clutch pearls and point to these kinds of individuals and just say, look how bigoted they are. The bigotry is the point. It's not actually. It will spill into the real world, obviously. We're starting to see young men who are eating this slop up do gross things in the real world, and we'll have to contend with that, and we'll have to throw the book at them, I think. And that'll be one major deterrent for it. But it's a real problem, and there are no easy solutions, because all they want is your attention and outrage, because that is their currency, and that is the economy that they are trafficking in.
Right. And look, I have a son, and I'm surrounded by guys all the time anyway. And I have a very, if you've seen me on X, my sense of humor, I get down and dirty. So, and I get it, right? I totally get it, but I'm not making, and by the way, I'm not targeting, we all agree. Making what's called off-color jokes and whatever. So what? Everyone does it. Making a platform out of it. See, that's where I draw the line. When your platform, let's take the College Republicans of America, because I'm kind of in on them right now. Let's take University of Florida as an example. Their platform purports to be conservative values and free speech. Okay, we all love that. It actually is, they had several blog posts about Indians needing to go back. And I'm talking about the FBI director, and I'm talking about Vivek. So if you're Kash Patel, you're not an American, you will never be an American, you can't serve your country, those things, okay? And then also having a platform that says one thing, but does something different. Targeting Jews, where you're having events. To be fair, Jews can attend, or they don't have to attend. But at what point, if you don't announce this as a stand-up routine, because I go to, I went to, I forgot the last guy I went to see comedy. I get it. It's as billed. But when you're masquerading this as a philosophy of conservative politics in college, I think it's incumbent upon all of us who know better to call that out.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the big question, right? Trump was so the president of the moment in 2016 because no one could really conceive of Obama was the first president who ran an internet campaign and utilized the internet heavily in his ascension to the Oval Office. But Trump was the first president of the internet era, where everything moves so fast. And Trump is someone who has a keen sense of how the media operates. And I think that extends to the new media, even though he's someone who is hyper-focused on old media and watches a lot of TV and pays attention to the shows and the ratings and all of that. But some of those skills do translate in his case. And now you're seeing sort of the next iteration of that politician. There are some people who are saying, Tucker Carlson's going to run for president someday. Or some of these other kind of lowbrow, mudslinging, Matt Iglesias, who's actually a center-left analyst on politics, has said something to the effect of, these days it's just simply better to be fast and sometimes wrong than to be slow but always right. And We'll see. We'll see if that's borne out. But that is the challenge that these people are grappling with. I mean, Fishback is the extreme example of that. It's essentially a racist meme campaign. I think maybe I'm too much of an optimist on this, but I think that it is true that, for example, Tucker Carlson shifts and leans into all of this because he's online now post Fox. He was tiptoeing there a little bit while he was on Fox still, but since his ouster, he leans into it hardcore because his audience is no longer the Fox News viewer.
That's right.
His audience extends well beyond the American right, and if we're being honest, well beyond America itself. With international, whether it doesn't even have to be a foreign op. It's much less controversial and not even an accusation. It's just simply true that if you have an internet show, your audience extends to the whole world. And if you're saying things that you would commonly hear in Islamist circles, in jihad-friendly circles, in the third world where barbarism and anti-Semitism and chauvinism is way more commonplace, you're going to pick up steam in those circles if you're an American commentator saying those things. That's why a lot of these people have been put on a pipeline over the past couple of decades to like RT, which is a Russian platform, or some of the platforms that come out of Turkey or Qatar. They're attracted to these things because they resonate with that diaspora or even constituencies within those countries.
Which is fine. I mean, I love free speech, honor it, etc. I mean, I'm, in the business of speech myself. I have no problem with that. Don't bring them into the White House, right? I mean, when you cross the you cross the line between, okay, wow, this guy is saying Jews need a blood test. American soldiers are, I'm sorry, raping people in Iran, right? When you're saying things like that, and then
is that the latest? Is that the latest one he's throwing around?
It's the latest and greatest as of yesterday. Is that everyone knows when President Trump says it's got to be unconditional surrender, that it actually means, ladies and gentlemen, that our servicemen are going to rape women, and that's why they're going to, give up and blah blah blah. Never mind the fact that Iranians are desperate to be liberated, and it's only a small sliver, which is the Islamic government we're targeting. Never mind that. But when you see him as a political advisor to the White House and best friends of the man that's one heartbeat away from the presidency, that is where you start saying, okay, speech has stopped and national security threats have entered the room, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. You mentioned earlier the anti-Indian animus too, which is so pronounced on the right. I think it's going to start creeping up more on the left as well, from the hard left, and it will take the other vehicle, right?
Because Modi and Netanyahu are great friends, and this is going on. And of course, I pointed out 3 days before this operation started, Modi went over and did a state visit to Israel. I mean, and you saw the video. For me, I'm a girl, so I saw the video, and it's so cute, those two together. I mean, it was just such a warm visit. And I thought what you thought. I'm like, uh-oh, here comes a hard target for the left.
Yeah, I mean, you're starting to see it already. I mean, recently, Priyanka Chopra, who's a Indian American actor and producer, she's married to Nick Jonas from the Jonas Brothers, went on Joe Rogan's show and talked a little bit about Indian history and her culture, and said largely non-controversial, non-offensive things that are normal about India, which is a great American ally and great ally of the West. And my feed started filling up with hardcore leftist watermelon flag pronoun bio people freaking out and foaming at the mouth. I mean, one of these tweets, I just see it here from Sammy Gold, who is describes as an essayist writer with bylines at Liberal Currents, wrote, "I hope you guys get ready for when the Indian diaspora finally has enough institutional support to create the new APAC. you're going to be seeing nationalist hogwash like this more often, and it will be considered quote unquote woke. And so, yeah, I mean, this is following the same playbook, right? Out and out hatred toward a group of people who are successful economically, who are moving rightward, following that economic success in American society and opportunity, are stepping sort of into the upper echelon, are becoming more negatively disposed to DEI initiatives and racial preferences because they're being disproportionately penalized for it. I mean, this is actually not even true of American Jews, who have sort of irrationally retained incredibly progressive views on social and economic policy, even as they've entered into the higher ring of American society. But yeah, the left will sick their dogs on Indians, absent total dismissal and condemnation of India as a country, the modern country. And this is ugly. And it ultimately redounds to India as an opponent of third worldism. India is an opponent of radical Islamist terrorism. And that doesn't sit well with the sort of Western self-hating or the self-hating left that you find across the West and in America.
Very, very terrifying and observant point. But, you know, that's a perfect entree into this poll, because, you know, when I think of, I'm in the business, right? I deal with politicians who are on the left and right. And to be fair and honest with you guys, you know, I coalesce with them more often than you would know when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, because there are some that do speak out, and they will, and they face, you know, consequences. There's some that won't, but will talk. So all that is to say that, you know, a lot of us have become so polarized that we really don't have anyone that's Democrat in our lives, right? We don't have any window into knowing what they're like, which is why, you know, I think this poll is a good way for us to kind of understand that, you know, and I know this goes without saying, but they're not all alike. So your poll suggests, I mean, this is very revealing to me, that like 47% of Democrats are moderate, and they want the party to move away from radical ideologies like, and I'm going to show these slides, transing, open borders, no policing. So is the Democrat Party actually really more moderate, you think, than the loudest activists?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do think so. I think the data bears that out. I'll talk a little bit of some of the high level findings, and then maybe afterward we can talk a little bit about why they're not quite so resonant or don't manifest themselves in Democratic politicians around the country. So in this new Manhattan Institute survey we took of nearly 2,600 Democratic voters and 2024 Kamala voters, we offer, I think, one of the more granular looks that anyone has yet dived into on this disconnect. So contrary to this broadly held assumption that the Democratic base is some caricature of, you know, hardcore socialist revolutionaries and woke militants with rainbow haircuts, the activists are there, but they're a minority and not a particularly large one. So we got a plurality of respondents who told us that their party should move toward the ideological center. A much smaller fraction supports them shifting to the left. Democratic voters also said by, I think, a greater than 2-to-1 margin that the future of the party should prioritize effective governing over fighting Trump all the time and the Republicans. And this basically tells us that the median Democratic voter isn't asking for a more far left version of the Dems. They want something closer to the moderation of Bill Clinton or the politics which people like Gavin Newsom are sort of now, like, really disingenuously, if you ask me, but at least attempting to pay some amount of lip service to. And in our analysis, we found that the Democratic coalition ultimately kind of breaks into three analytically distinct blocks. You've got moderates, like you mentioned earlier. That's about 47% of the coalition, nearly half of voters who identify themselves as moderate Democrats, independents, or anti-Trump Republicans. They're a demographically diverse mix. They're older on average, And they're the most electorally flexible. And by that, I mean like 45% of them say they have never voted for only 45% of them say they've never voted for a non-Democratic presidential candidate, which means a majority of them have voted for someone other than a Democrat for president at some point. And so that's nearly half of the Democratic coalition, and that's a significant chunk. You've got the second block, progressive liberals. We hear a lot about the difference between a liberal Democrat and a progressive Democrat. There actually isn't that much of one. This is a reliably left-leaning, much whiter than the other blocks, disproportionately concentrated in the suburbs and on the West Coast. No surprise, but they're still kind of in the firmament of the mainstream on the left, and that's 37%. And then last, you do have this woke fringe. These are the people who identify as democratic socialists or communists. They're only 11% of the coalition. It won't surprise you that the youngest of the three groups, they're the most conspiratorial, they're the most likely to report poor mental health, which I found pretty funny and interesting. And not funny, interesting, not funny. And then I guess, not incidentally to all of this, they're obviously the most likely to spend excessive sums of time on the internet. This tracks with what we learned when we did a focus group and polling on the GOP not that long ago. The youngest and the most hyper online Republicans are the ones who skew toward that same kind of ideological wackiness.
But they don't. Here's the thing, the difference. They think that having mental health struggles is an issue. In other words, they think that is a weakness. However, just like this group you're talking about, they are victims. They are perpetual victims, cry bullies, etc. Exactly what I see on the left.
Yeah, totally. And you can just go across the spectrum. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, issue by issue. This chunk of Democrats, the woke fringe, is out of step with certainly where the moderate near half of the coalition is at, and really with where progressive liberals are at too. Take immigration for one. In our poll, only about 1 in 10 Democrats voters actually support a true open borders policy. Fewer than a quarter want to increase legal immigration levels. I'll say that again. Only fewer than a quarter of Democrats want to increase the level of legal immigration in the country. So that's a big cross-partisan agreement point there. And majorities do favor shifting toward a skills-based admissions system, which prioritizes the deportation of criminal offenders and rewards merit. And on public safety, you've got Democrats who are divided over the criminal justice system generally, but they strongly support aggressive prosecution of gun crimes. That always trips up Democratic politicians when you ask them about it. They're strong on gun control, but they're never strong on the crimes that are with the guns. A strong majority view police as essential. The defund of police is totally dead. They overwhelmingly reject political violence that you see an appetite for online from the crazies a lot. On the transgender issues, you already said it, but most voters support preventing biological boys from competing in girls' sports, banning transgender medical and surgical interventions for minors, and requiring school. They also support requiring schools to notify parents if a child requests to identify as transgender or change pronouns in class. That's something that Newsom signed a bill out in California. It's a lot of interesting findings on policy. The coalition's economic views are also a lot less revolutionary than the party rhetoric often implies. Democrats do favor redistribution and certain kinds of populist consumer protections, but only small minorities embrace the radical view, the mantra of like all billionaires should not exist. A lot of them don't even think that like America's economic system is so rigged it ought to be torn down. They say they want reform. And you got a huge chunk of them that express major concern about welfare fraud, which I think we're going to hear. There was a great piece from CBS News on it in California. I think we're going to hear a lot more about it in the year to come. And large numbers show a kind of new interest in actually free trade and some other kind of traditional supply side policy and economics.
Yeah.
I think that might be a little bit more of like a knee jerk, like if Trump's for it, I'm against it kind of thing. But nevertheless, I mean, there are smart people within the Democratic Party who would like to engineer more support for those kinds of reforms. Ezra Klein, the New York Times guy, and Derek Thompson from The Atlantic wrote a book called Abundance, which sort of made the case for Democrats embracing some amount of greater deregulation or open-mindedness toward free market policies. And I think if savvy political consultants, executors on the left can come up with a way to sort of shoehorn abundance into a broader, like, anti-Trump resistance effort, they'll have some success. There's potential. Our politics are in a weird tinderbox moment. There's potential for some realignment, and the Democratic Party just isn't as left-wing as Democratic staffers in Washington, D.C., and Democratic donors in places like New York and San Francisco are.
Well, it's very okay. So we in North Carolina, I'll tell you, we had the primaries, and we had 9 total. I think 6 from our side and 3 from the Democrat side, incumbents who in state government were thrown out. And the interesting thing is that there were 3 Democrats thrown out, all for the same reason, that they voted with Republicans on 2 different issues. One of them was forcing, of course, federal law compliance with the ICE detainer laws. So you had one candidate candidate in the race, but one politician, long-term politician, Carla Cunningham out of Mecklenburg County. She said, yeah, I think our sheriff should cooperate, etc. The Democrat governor and all the Democrat apparatus came out and primaried her, and she only got 30% of the vote. That's one. The other issue is that there were 2 traditional candidates. And by the way, all 3 are minorities. 1 Muslim and 2 blacks. They threw them the hell out. The other 2 voted to, wait for it, had parental consent for transing and to keep porn out of schools.
Yeah.
The entire Democrat apparatus here coalesced and got them out. So you're seeing, if that's like what you're seeing all over the country. Now, I want to point this out. 2 of those reps are from Mecklenburg County, which is the Charlotte area. Keep that in mind. That might be regional. Statewide, it may not play. But that's a very important thing to recognize for all of us here, especially when you look at, hang on, let me put this up. Wait. Okay. This immigration one. So when you're looking at I think it's fair to look at the top line Harris voters here. The 54%, it reflects wanting for, once you've been arrested for a crime, particularly a violent crime, for you to be ousted from the country.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And look at, if you consider yourself, get this was crazy. If you consider yourself a progressive or a liberal, that goes up to 58%.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it's crazy.
I think you're tapping into something that is a very keen and astute observation. This becomes very hard to believe when you're seeing these things happen out in the real world, like what you're describing. I come on your podcast or your stream, I'm telling you that Democrats are in fact more moderate than we all believe them to be. But you point to real world instances of Democrats choosing the least moderate option in your neck of the woods. And you're not in New York City. Your people didn't vote for Zohran Mamdani over Andrew Cuomo. And yet this thing happened. Now, why did that happen? It's relatively easy to take out a state legislator in a low turnout primary in an off-cycle election that nobody is really paying attention to. It's not the presidential election. Once upon a time, Democrats used to do better in higher turnout elections because they had lower information voters. But in the Trump era, that's no longer really the case. People who really don't want to obsess about politics all the time, who aren't patrons of the government in some meaningful way, meaning they don't belong to a public sector union or work for the government, they're not a teacher or another kind of public sector union member. They're not focused on politics all of the time. They're not voting in every single election. They vote when the guy who's running shows up on Joe Rogan or something where they actually are going to pay attention. And yeah, so again, this is the million-dollar question. If Democrats are this moderate, why does the party so frequently appear otherwise? And that part of that answer is this institutional ecosystem that now governs democratic politics. Over the past 2 decades, you've got a network of progressive advocacy groups, ideological nonprofits, really activist donors like George Soros and his ilk, and aligned unions who have accumulated an enormous amount of influence over candidate recruitment, meaning who runs, messaging, meaning what kinds of ads get made, how we talk about issues, what sort of pamphlets get printed, and policy priorities, meaning what do we care about? So if there's a ton of money behind the trans issue, and there are doctors and drug companies and nonprofit groups that have a really left-wing conception of the world that stand to get rich and focus on this issue, even if a lot of people don't care about this issue, which, by the way, they're now leaning on, right? Now that they know this is so deeply unpopular, you see like James Tallarico from Texas just gets on some podcast and says, "Oh, there are only 2%, or I think it was Graham Plattner actually in Maine who said there are only like 2 trans kids who play high school sports in Maine."
Yeah.
The guy with the Nazi tattoo. Yeah. And so it's like, so they come up with these creative ways to weasel out of giving you an answer on where they're all at on this issue because they know the extent of the problem. But in any event, this creates a dynamic where primary candidates in the kinds of races where you're talking about, if they deviate from the orthodoxy set in place by the activists, by this professional class that is way to the left of their own voters, they face organized opposition, well-funded primary challenges, relentless pressure campaigns from within their own coalition. So you get, as a result of that, Democratic politicians who see their incentives very clearly point toward ideological escalation, ratcheting it up, getting more radical, rather than the moderation that their voters actually clamor for. They're responding to the loudest voices in the party, even if they constitute a small minority, because they're powerful, rather than representing the quieter instincts held by most of their voters.
That's fascinating. And plus, you've got the institutions themselves who are organized in this way. So we don't have unions here, but we do have, the schools, all of them. We know this already. I mean, to an extent, you even have the banks. I mean, we've got Bank of America is headquartered here, and they do a lot of, at least outwardly, a lot of crazy things. But I've heard that there's a lot of, internal voter education efforts. And wouldn't you know, they're always voter education in one direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you do have, you're not a blue state. You're not a blue state yet. But you've got public sector unions. I mean, you've got the UE local 150. You've got the state employees. Like here's the thing about and you've the North Carolina Association of Educators. And like, look, it's not that they're bad people or anything, but it's just that there's economics that supercharge this dynamic. Okay, you've got many party leaders who depend directly on government spending, regulation, and nonprofit advocacy for their livelihoods. This produces a kind of patronage politics. It's like as the leadership benefits materially from an ever-expanding progressive agenda, like any electoral value that might come by way of moderation, that pales in comparison to the threat that it would pose to the interests of all of these people who are hooked in. The largest consistent voting bloc for the Democrats are people who work for the government and stand to benefit from the government spending more money on them. It's just the reality. The only exception to that rule is really in the military, where Republicans tend to want to spend more money. It's brass tacks economics for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, we field a lot of complaints here about, why did this come up onto the floor for a vote, or moreover, why did this get voted on? And people don't understand. It's an unfortunate reality that incentives are not aligned as you would think once your guy gets into the legislature. It's not, right? And how do you explain that back home? It's difficult. And that's when the gaslighting comes in. I mean, we recognize it because we're in politics, right? And you cannot run an election out of a mud hut. You've got to appease some donors to an extent. So you've got, conservative and leftists, right? You've got I think, extremes of our grassroots on both sides that are unreasonable when it comes to the concessions that some politicians have to make to get elected, to stay elected, to be a part of a governing body, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm kind of engaging here with you today in like some rank punditry, but in reality, my day job at the Manhattan Institute is, I run our government relations work. You deploy our scholars, or sometimes I go out myself to state capitals, in North Carolina or other places around the country. And we talk to lawmakers about policy blueprints that we set in motion, and we sell them on our ideas. But it's like you said, like, we are not the most powerful lobby. I mean, we are pure, like, we're ideological. We just sell things because we think they're good ideas.
Yeah.
But it's funny, like, that pales in comparison to like the big dogs who are going to come out at the next election cycle and spend big money on you one way or the other. Like, all of these red states, solid red states, are realizing this now and having this fight with teachers unions and school unions. Like, they don't like when, red state lawmakers start talking too much about education freedom or school choice initiatives, or the dollars following the student, the idea that your zip code shouldn't be your education destiny, because that screws with their model and their bottom line and their funding, and it could put failing schools out of business and underperforming teachers with a lower salary. And they don't want the system to go in that way. That's not how union dynamics work. And I'm not an anti-union person, certainly not private sector unions. Those are important and rich and have a place, but in the public sector, this is a real major force in our politics. And public sector unions are also the most well equipped to drive not just dollars, but turnout in these low salient, low turnout elections where there's not many people showing up to begin with. And if you're a state legislator in a state where the elections are not the same year as the presidential election or even the Senate or governor election, it's quite easy to rely on the union, as long as they've got your back, to keep the checks flowing and to get people turning out to cast their ballots for you based on the union's instruction.
This makes a lot of sense, and I think it's explaining. I think we're like pulling back the curtain for a lot of you guys that don't know how the sausage is made. And believe me, if you did, I don't know about you, but I cannot bring myself to watch the news anymore. Like, I feel like I'm part of it in some sense, right? You're covering it, you're doing certain story. I cannot sit down and digest 2 hours of news at night like most other people, right?
Yeah.
Because you know how it works.
Unfortunately, it does feel like drinking from the fire hose. Like, I feel like news is everywhere. And I recently did this focus group down in Nashville, not too far from your neck of the woods. Spoke with a bunch of young Republicans, and it's interesting. I asked them, like, where do you get your news? And not a single one of them named a print publication. Not a single one of them gets their news from the newspaper. A couple of them, maybe like 1 or 2 out of 20, mentioned cable news, a network. But the vast majority for them, and maybe it's contributing to the ideological wackiness of Gen Z, the news comes to them. They
push notifications
passively, through the algorithm. It's just like whatever served up to them. There's no trust barrier. There's no confirmation of sources. It's just like, I was going through my Instagram stories, and then I saw one that told me, so-and-so is a lizard person from Epstein Island, and the Israelis are paying him, and now he's the president of the United States. Whatever. This is so commonplace now. And this is how people get their news passively. They
Wow.
can't even name you their favorite columnist or their favorite anchor. They're just, they've got maybe some influencers that they sort of become faithful to and rely on. And so there's some good here, right? I mean, like I like Barry Weiss. I think she's a effective kind of alt-center voice who's shaking up journalism in the news industry. And it's interesting because she's very much a creature of the new media, right? I mean, she started in the traditional media at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. She left in kind of a blaze of fury and dominated in the new media environment and created a brand that was tremendously successful. But now she's going back into legacy media, and she's going to try to bring that new media skill set to legacy media. And I think that'll be an interesting dynamic. I think there'll be also people who come from legacy media to go to new media.
By the way,
a lot of that.
We're seeing a lot of that. And the crazy thing is like, look, as conservatives, and I'm guilty of this as well. We, during particularly in the 2020 election, kind of lost trust, and even some of us Fox News, perhaps, right? And sort of ventured out and said, okay, we're going to have these. Okay, I'm a fan of commentary. By the way, you can't go wrong with a commentary podcast. You'll never be led astray, by the way, if you're really, really political in nature. So I kind of stayed with the tried and true ones. I have a lot of friends that ventured into, hell, 2 years ago, you would have thought Megyn Kelly was a conventional podcaster, right? That's another example of someone who left legacy media into this new vista of news, right? But I think our collective distrust of, in particular, the media has exacerbated or maybe even caused this problem, because we just, as Republicans, are getting our news from such alternative sources, and it's been reinforced as, hey, that they're reliable. You can trust them. The guys you can't trust are the ones not talking about Epstein Island and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So
yeah. I mean, if we accused like Fox News of audience capture or MSNBC of audience capture, like this problem is just metastasized and at such a greater level in a sea full of small fish. And even Tucker Carlson is ultimately one of many, many, many. Candace Owens, like, they have big audiences as far as the new media environment goes, but there's so many different people, and they're appealing to, again, the whole world. Fox News.
You don't know if they're real people. Like,
right.
There's suggestions that this could be altered. I don't know how you do it, but you alter your audience. I suppose you pay for audience or whatever. I mean, there's no real way to know.
Yeah, I mean, I look, I don't think we should delude ourselves. Like, clearly, even if some amount of it is manufactured, there are people who are consuming this content, and a lot of people are consuming this content not in the full format, but they're getting passive clips of it. But the point I was just going to make earlier is that it's very interesting to me from the standpoint of, audience capture applies to a much greater extent if you're an influencer, because people come to expect something of you. And we told ourselves a story about all of these people who go online and then they're going to be independent, and they're going to be able to break precedent and shake things up. But it's far easier to cut the cord from one influencer and hit unfollow than it is to never pay attention to what one of the three major news channels is saying ever again. And also, like, you don't have to worry about, like, the FCC fining you or being held accountable to scrutiny from other major players in the media the same way. I mean,
there's no editorial control. There's no editorial oversight. And so, guys, I can tell you what that means, because I've written for, articles. I've done investigative journalist pieces, for instance. As you know, you don't just write it and publish it like I do now. You've got a team of lawyers looking over your stuff, because it's you're creating it, right? It's investigative. You're creating news, actually. You've got several editors. So to get a piece actually from written to published, there are many, many steps. these guys, and me too, I want to be fair. I mean, I'm a podcaster. I mean, that's what I do, right? I mean, I do investigative stuff for other outlets, but I also do this. They don't have any editorial oversight at all. We used to say, so what about that? But now we're going, oh my God, how do you just spin bullshit and not get yourself sued? I mean, I ask myself that you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, my hope is that two things will happen. One, ingenuity will come to the legacy media space and accountability for all of the things that they were so totally screwed up and wrong about. And more people like Barry Weiss, talents from the new media domain, will tap into legacy media and improve that product. I hope it's not just CBS. I hope it's other networks too. And on the flip side, I hope there will be accountability for the recklessness of some players who have rose to the kind of the top of the ugly influencer mudslinging space. And you're starting to see it. I mean, just the other week, I think it was just last week, Tucker Carlson did his bizarre interview with Mike Huckabee, where he didn't leave the airport in Tel Aviv. Huckabee is the ambassador to the United States to Israel.
A friend of mine got the actual foot. I see where you're going with this. I love it. A friend of mine, Ollie London, you guys, you have to follow him if you don't. He's a little bit, what I love about him, he's a little bit tabloid, but he's got some good finds. And he found the footage to, fact check Tucker in real time, which is it.
And not just that, but Carlson said during that exchange something completely false about President Isaac Herzog of Israel. Suggested he had been friends with Epstein and gone to Epstein Island. And Isaac Herzog promptly put out a statement saying, this is not true. This never happened. I never did this. And it was forceful and it was direct. And it suggested that maybe there could be additional consequences behind the scenes or a lawyer letter or something like that. And Tucker Carlson pretty promptly, in short order, had to cut a direct-to-camera, like hostage video selfie clip of him saying that was dead wrong, what I said. Candace Owens is probably getting sued by Bridget Macron and a bunch of other people for the things she's saying. So hopefully this will bring some amount of accountability to this space. I'm not that optimistic, though. I mean, years ago, Alex Jones was sued by the families of Sandy Hook massacre for a very high number that he was forced to pay to them. But he's still out there, still doing his thing. I was just going to say. And he's not even the worst actor anymore.
Right, yeah. I mean, he's moderate by comparison. So with all this said, I mean, this has been an excellent conversation because we're talking about things, if you're very political, and I talk to people all the time, good, stable voters, donors, etc. They're not aware of a lot of the things we're talking about. They don't understand. They don't listen to Tucker Carlson. They don't listen to this. They don't understand what all the brouhaha is about anti-semitism, where it's coming from and all this stuff. And I think now what's interesting is I listened to the NRO conference. National Review did a 4-hour conference today about anti-Semitism. I mean, great speakers from the new media space, in addition to Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, a few rabbis. But I mean, now you're having, media companies, right, who feel responsible for what's put out there in the ether and feel responsible on some level for being a referee, right, on this, come out and say this. And I think that's going to grab the attention of voters. But let's end this with this. Even Democrats now are saying, we're ready for normal, right? And I think Republicans want that too. What we're talking about in the conservative party, in the movement, is a threat to normal. Because I'm telling you right now, nobody's going to vote for conspiracy theorists, fishback types, right? I've been a regular critic of J.D. Vance because in my opinion, he's not only playing footsies with this. He made a comment 2 weeks ago, to your point, about this outrageous interview that was done by Ambassador Huckabee. And when asked what he thought, he said, I have seen some clips of it, And I think it's a good conversation for the right to have. I mean, in my mind, he's participating in it. We don't need someone at the top of the ticket during a midterms injecting other than normal. And so, given all that, can you give us a prediction? Let's just say if we don't harness what we've been talking about, this out of control anti-Semitism, what are your predictions for the midterms for us as conservatives?
Well, good pollsters never make predictions. They just give you snapshots in time and tell you where things kind of stand right now. But nevertheless, no, I mean, the midterms are going to be a tough environment just because of some fundamental factors. It's always difficult for an incumbent president to see success in the midterms 2 years in. American politics is just so much like a pendulum in that respect. It just swings back and forth. We've had exceptions to that rule before because of outside events. I think, by the way,
like during 9/11, Bush, he increased the seats,
Yeah, I think a successful conclusion. And by the way, in 2020, Biden and the Democrats didn't do as bad as they did, I think, because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, as well as continued banging about the 2020 election results too. They're generally speaking, though, I think in basically every election, the party that the body politic perceives as more normal tends to win. There are exceptions to that rule. I think, Hillary Clinton was probably perceived as more normal than Donald Trump, but Hillary Clinton was also, a version of normal that Americans were very sick of in their politics.
Yes.
I don't think today's America, I don't think they're pining for something much more radical, much more subversive, much more domineering, much more brash, much more offensive than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an effective politician because he pairs a spirit of policy pragmatism and generally actually an overall spirit of moderation with respect to his footprint on the GOP with a brashness and an almost like a radicalism in his disposition, in how he communicates, in his approach, in his rhetoric, and in his follow through. He's not going to get mucked up by what the system in Washington, D.C. trains him to. He says, Iran's not going to get a nuclear weapon. If they try to, we will stop them. The median Trump voter, the MAGA voter, understood that during the campaign.
95%? A new poll just came out today. Was it 95%?
I saw one at 97 and one at 94, I think. So there's enthusiastic, near unanimous support from MAGA Republicans for what the president is doing right now, to the shock of many people in this influencer, dissident right, isolationist class.
Bannon, Jack Posobiec, Megyn Kelly. I mean, I defend. Look, to your point, if you're going to have an eccentric personality and presentation in your delivery of your political rhetoric, you better have the intellectual heft to back it up and then know how to get it done. That's the thing. These people are talking with that same sort. They're trying to emulate Trump without any accomplishments behind their belt and without any historical sense of what has happened, what can happen. And in the Middle East, that's everything. If you don't have that knowledge, and actually, you need a little institutional knowledge to kind of understand that, right? Which this influencer class completely disregards.
Yeah. I think running against grievance is probably untapped right now. I think a savvy political entrepreneur can articulate, if they're able to articulate a version of America that says no, actually, it's not just all the system. You have some agency over life. You need to create some opportunities for yourself. I'll fight for you and I'll fight for opportunities for you, but you also need to fight for yourselves. Maybe it won't sell with Gen Z, totally honestly, but I do think there is a massive chunk of Americans on the right and the left that want to hear a blatantly, bluntly, and directly anti-grievance message, something that says success is something that is worth pursuing, meritocracy is something that is worth preserving, and America isn't a shithole country. It's a great country, and we can only make it better by creating opportunities for our people to work hard and succeed.
Your poll just indicated that. This is a fabulous way that you framed this. Instead of right track, wrong track, I loved this instead. And 64% of Harris voters say the founding has been mostly a good force in the world. The moderates obviously higher, but again, this shocked me. The progressive liberals, I think it was, they're a point higher. So, so what you just said is reflective in these numbers, is that someone needs to say, look, we're a great country. We have plenty of opportunity. By the way, you asked a question about DEI. And it was, of course, Black people feel, and if you ask Jews too, we do feel still persecuted. So there's a little bit higher. But when you ask white progressives, if we're doing well with civil rights, I want to say 60% of them said that, we're doing, we're improving race relations.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could get into. Honestly, the numbers on DEI are maybe less cause for optimism if you're a right of center person looking at what's going on in the Democratic coalition. This Texas Senate primary was interesting. It was like you had the hard left guy who presents himself as kind of a moderate because he, I would say, weaponizes his Christianity in an attempt to make it seem as though Christianity is actually just a vehicle for progressivism. God's non-binary and abortion is in the Bible and yada, yada, yada. But
that's crazy.
And then there's Jasmine Crockett, who in relative terms was kind of like the moderate option in that race, or at least insofar as more moderate voters, a lot of them.
And the devil actually, which is a less radical position than voting somebody completely new in.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of the more moderate voters in the Democratic Party are actually going to continue to be pro-DEI because they are minorities and because they see them as directly benefiting themselves. And so, I'm a conservative. I believe in meritocracy, colorblind meritocracy. So maybe that'll be less attractive because I'm not into government handouts as much. So, but that's an interesting dynamic, that people who are otherwise moderate in a lot of different ways aren't quite ready to say goodbye to the ways that they benefit from government interaction, interference. Right. But can't win them all.
No, definitely not. Well, this has been a great illuminating conversation. I think it's going to give us food for thought. And again, it's a peek behind the curtain on a lot of these issues. And I encourage everybody. In fact, I order everybody, you've got to follow Jesse on X, and the Manhattan Institute we all follow anyway. And if you don't, why is the real question here. And your newsletters are fabulous and gives us fabulous insight. Everything from crime, policies on crime, et cetera, just revealing data. You guys do a lot of great work. You're one of my favorite think tanks, quite honestly, because you're doing.
I thought you were a heritage girl, no?
Them fighting words, my friend.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It was great to be with you. I really appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and we will talk to you, I'm sure, again before the midterms. We're all stressing here.
Thanks very much.
So thank you. Have a great evening.